Welcome back, everyone, to Malferon's Sapphire Steel Set Champs List video. There's a lot to cover here. As always, if you want to skip around and check out the lists, you can feel free to. Then the description below and the loading bar should have the chapters themselves as well. But I highly recommend checking out the entire video if you are in any way not a seasoned veteran, if you are new to Sapphire Steel, new to Set Champs or competition, or just don't really feel like you have the strongest idea of what to expect from the rest of the meta. I think you'll get a lot of high yield stuff from this video. The video will cover a multitude of things to expect from other color combinations as well, which is a new thing when doing this video, as well as 5 deck lists that have been pretty strongly tested, and one of which I've already secured my Set Champs mat and my promo, meaning I did win my local Set Champs. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. As always, I'd like to start with an outline. We're going to cover why to consider Sapphire Steel, the matchup spread of how Sapphire Steel kind of does into the general meta, and the different color combinations. A new section called Opponents, Lines, Tech, and Tips, where I'm going to go over some expectations on what a color combination may do, such as dogs, green, blue, and blurple. Things that they are wanting to put out on the play, on the draw, and some high yield things to consider in those particular matchups. Those are ones that I get questions about all the time. Going to go over some deck lists and then some final thoughts on Set Champs in general. So why Sapphire Steel? Other than the fact that it's the gentleman's colors and it's just the greatest color combination this game has ever offered. It's got really strong, consistent removal, right? And so Sapphire Steel has the advantage of having access to the really strong Steel songs. He Hurled His Thunderbolt, Strength of a Raging Fire, and then Sapphire Song being Let It Go, right? These are some of the most powerful removal cards in the game that can be executed as early as turn 3. And so, you know, Sapphire Steel has access to these, and they're very, very ink efficient too, allowing you to continue to play really big, strong, relevant bodies while still controlling the board. And Sapphire Steel has a lot of big, strong, relevant bodies. Sapphire Steel has access to cards like Aerial Sonic Warrior, which allows really strong, persistent, and consistent, efficient removal with things like songs, which is already a key reason to play Steel. Things like Mrs. Incredible, who can essentially clear a board of weak characters due to her ability to re-ready. And a multitude of other removal options like Hades, Arthur, etc., etc. The color combination has access to a robust array of tech options, right? Tech is particular cards that have function as answers to particular problems or other decks, right? So Sapphire Steel has access to inking removal, right, which gets past things that punish you for banishing, such as an Emerald Chronicon. Has access to item removal, has really easy ways to deal with locations, has the ability to ramp meaning to ink additional times to get to bigger bodies, right? Has a multitude of tools at their disposal to deal with a multitude of problems, which makes it a very versatile deck, which makes it a very good deck in the hands of a skilled player. And a surprise factor, right? And so what I mean by that is that there's not a lot of people planning for Sapphire Steel, right? So if you bring Sapphire Steel, it's unlikely they've done as many practice reps into your deck. It's very, very unlikely that they planned for your deck or made particular tech for your deck. And so, you can rest assured that walking into a Set Champs, although people may be familiar with what Sapphire Steel wants to do and the tools that they have available, they will in no way be well practiced into your deck. It's pretty uncommon. And you can use that to your advantage. It's very powerful in a best of 3, and that's where Sapphire Steel really shines. Sapphire Steel actually feels pretty at its weakest in a best of 1, right? But when you really know how to adjust your mulligan, which is pretty complicated in Sapphire Steel, when you really know, what big bodies to save and which ones you can ink safely, what matchups do you ink an Aerial? What matchups do you go for the Omnidroid Shiftline? What matchups do you, rush a Tinkerbell? Do you ink a Tinkerbell? Which ones do you ink your songs? Do you save your songs? This is very, very relevant. And so it really shines in a best of 3, competitive format. And, Sapphire Steel is just really satisfying to play, right? So what's kind of the general matchup spread, right? As is usual, Sapphire Steel does pretty well into the majority of the purple colors. There's a couple of asterisk marks here. I'm going to explain some of that. The the really easy matchups, right? We'll start there. Purple Steel. Purple Steel has always been what Sapphire Steel's feasted on, at least since set 9, since rotation. This is particularly true sets 10 and 11, and remains true. Purple Steel. The only way it really beats Sapphire Steel is if it goes very, very fast, right? So the burn variant might be a little bit more complicated if you're not prepared for it, especially if they're on the play. But outside of that, Sapphire Steel, you survive the Strength of a Raging Fire on curve that they try to do after they go 1, 2, 3, play a 4-drop, seeing Strength of a Raging Fire with their 3-drop, right? And that's really their only real opportunity to not only hit that, but then hit that and then quest aggressively, because after that stage of the game, once you establish your big threats that are really hard to get rid of, right? It's hard to get rid of an Aerial or a Tinkerbell efficiently as Purple Steel, outside of like back-to-back really well-timed Strength of Raging Fires followed up by draw. They kind of just crumble apart. A lot of their things are very, their willpowers are really easy to eliminate, and we get too much trade value against them, and they kind of have to hit the perfect string of cards. Kind of have to go first and really hope that you sort of low roll to have any real chance against us. That kind of reigns true with red purple, ruby amethyst. Red purple is essentially a free matchup. It's like a 90-10 in our favor. It's basically it's purple steel, but they don't have good removal against us, right? And so all the ruby removal means nothing. The only one that means any relevance is a Bee King Undisputed, which comes out so late. Anyway, so just make sure against red purple that you're kind of saving a Mulan or a Tipo or something or even a Cinderella, and just keeping them up readied and having them purely function as fodder to be banished if they do a Bee King Undisputed. Otherwise, they're banking on like a really good Elsa curve and just following with lots of removal, but you can kind of just really use any of your song removal and they kind of just fall apart. Red steel and red red green are sort of easy matchups. They kind of suffer the same problems that red purple and purple steel suffer, is that their willpowers are overall pretty low, or they suffer from really bad draw, so they can't keep up with our onslaught of removal, and can efficiently deal with our bigger bodies, and so they kind of just fall apart. Yellow, purple, amber, steel, and red, yellow are kind of interesting. I think they are both neutral matchups and favored matchups. It kind of depends on the build. So yellow, purple, the Dale variant, right, where it's a lot heavier on characters and looking to get value out of Dale, or even like the Madrigal kind of like healing, damage flinging variants. These are pretty favorable for us overall. If they're on the play and they get their really oppressive high roll of like Dale into Elsa into Demona, and we don't really have good answers, or their gas just never ends. Yeah, they definitely can win it out. But if they don't have that high roll, or if they're not on the play with that, the deck kind of just falls apart to our removal, right? You bolt the Dale, the rest of their bodies do nothing, and then you kind of just pick them apart. With really good song usage and character usage. Amber Steel, similarly, they kind of have to high roll against us in many, many scenarios. This specifically, the favorable version is the non-toy version, right, where they don't have Woody Shift. I actually find the Woody Shift version a lot more challenging if they start off with the Woody Shift and play like a Mowgli for free to disrupt you. Red, yellow, similarly, this is actually the toys version. I actually find the toys version quite favorable for us overall. Really, that deck's only chance against us is to go first, to open up with Woody, and then play down a Mowgli or something, or like a really convenient Rex, and while doing that, allowing the Woody like 1 or 2 more extra turns, and to just go super wide and then close with Sid, right? That's really their only chance. And if they don't ever open up with the Woody Shift, they just kind of auto lose the matchup. And if they do, but they don't have but if he doesn't survive for like another 1 to 2 turns, it's also pretty free. So as far as neutral matchups go, I'd say the red yellow boost control is pretty neutral. It's a very very skill heavy matchup. You have to know how to deal with Scrooges and how to deal with them on curve. You have to really kind of be anticipating and saving removal for their boosters, right? And so that they're not getting Webby's Diary advantage. You have to anticipate the Raging Storm. You have to anticipate the Maleficent's Dragon and plan for that. And, things kind of have to line up pretty well on both players' ends. Amber Steel, the toy version, I'd say is a pretty neutral matchup. It can be, they can easily steamroll us. We can easily steamroll them. It very much depends on who goes first and, whether you high roll or not. Red Blue, I'd also put as neutral. This is extremely play draw dependent. On the play, this is one of the easiest matchups. You save a bolt for Robin Hood. Robin Hood comes down. This is the red blue action deck. You get rid of Robin Hood and the deck just falls apart. If they're on the play and if you don't have a hard casted bolt for their Robin Hood, if they're ever allowed to get off Robin Hood and Olaf and dig a little deeper, this actually is a pretty hard matchup to come back from, unless you have a perfect string of cards. Blue Steel by definition is neutral, right? So it is what it is. The yellow-purple version, that's more of like a library heavy, Raging Storm heavy, board wipe, draw a lot, is a lot more frustrating and challenging than the Dale version, mostly because a lot of our song removal feels less relevant there. And, playing cards like Hades or Let It Go feels really bad in that matchup because you're inking them closer to Raging Storm, you're letting them save more cards in hand, and you're kind of just letting them clear your big bodies for better value, and then they just keep going wide with small questers, and they just draw a lot. So just be wary of that. Blurple, I'd say overall is slightly favored for Blurple. It's, I've always kind of pitched it as a 45-55, 55 in their favor. But I'd say, for the most part, it is a skill-based matchup, and so that's why I put it as neutral. If you really know how to navigate the matchup, it's very, very winnable. But it's changed a lot, even though it hasn't changed too much. But approaching the matchup's changed a fair bit from 10 all the way up to 12. And then I'd say the unfavorable, this has kind of been true for, most of my videos, right? So blue-yellow feels miserable, right? You're fighting through an onslaught of Hades's, Let It Go's, warded characters. And then, they just put out locations and spam, board wipes the Raging Storm. It feels bad. You kind of have to get lucky. You kind of have to be the aggressor and quest faster than them. And, if they get out of Cauldron and can chain Hades's, you kind of just lose. Green-blue always feels pretty rough, right? I'd say it feels, I don't know, slightly better than set 11, right? I'd say set 11, it felt the most reasonable. Green-blue sort of evolved in that, a lot of green-blue lists include the new Milo Thatch, and they kind of just doubled down on just being more ward-heavy in general. And so some of them include Merryweather, some of them don't. Some of them now include more Scuttles, and then all of them include Milo Thatch, usually as a 4-of. And, these warded characters puts us in more of a conundrum because so much of our removal is song-based and on-play-based and really is kind of targeted. And so ward sort of eliminates a lot of value. So you have to get a lot more creative on how you force them to challenge it to you, when do you pull the trigger on questing, and then seeing how well you can disrupt their hand with Beyond the Horizon and such. Green Purples, if they open up with Webby and they're kind of like a version that constantly, gets rid of your characters with actions and then plays Bend to My Will, this is, and then Prince Philip wipe, the Webby opener into all that follow-up is just, it's a miserable process. It's, I don't even think about the matchup because it's really not that popular. But when it comes down, it's simply unfun. And then, I would put dogs as overall unfavorable. I think there's many cases where it can feel neutral, especially when we're on the play. But I'd say that for dogs, green, yellow, they have so much access to so many different outs that it's actually now become very hard to tech for dogs, right? It used to be maybe have some strategic item removal, make sure they don't finish you off with Chromacon. But now, they can reach for, the Eleanor build. They can reach for the new Mickey Mouse that shrinks your entire board. They can Under the Sea you. They can Chromacon you. And so it's really, really hard to know how to put in appropriate tech into your deck for this build, for this, deck in general. But the fact that they can, weasel out of so many bad spots and still just reflood the board with, abundant efficiency and still just close a game even after being behind. Their ability to come back, have consistent strong high rolls, Really just, they have everything going for them. And as any blue deck, it feels pretty miserable playing against dogs, but Sapphire Steel particularly, and I think it's because Mowgli and Ursula especially hurt us profoundly by getting rid of our songs. And they have a lot of 3 willpower characters, and if they play like Amber and Mickey Mouse, some of our steel removal feels slightly less good because of the higher willpowers. So very winnable, right? As I said, especially in a best of 3, and especially if you're on the play. But it never feels good, and it's always a challenge, regardless whether you win or not. So let's talk about some of my opponent's lines. Let's start with green-yellow, because you really have to understand a lot of what green-yellow is trying to do to best combat them, right? And so, green-yellow on the play, their ideal 1-drop is going to be Lady, family. This character is just so strong. She's a 3 willpower. She has the ability to, be boosted by a little tramp and quest for 3 on turn 2. She's a shift target. And so, really the ideal turn 1. It's almost impossible to get rid of her turn 1. So oftentimes they'll follow up Lady with Willow and Bobby. Now, commonly they can play Little Tramp as well if they want to go faster, right? The 2-drop Tramp, which will allow Lady to quest for 3. I'd say Bobby is kind of like the safer bet because, they've now seen what you are playing, right? They've seen your ink colors usually, and then they'll use Bobby to start sculpting their hand for their answer, right? Because what they're really thinking about is how do I, solidify the board state to close the game in like a couple turns. So Bobby helps like keep an Under the Sea, get rid of an Under the Sea, keep a Chromicon, pitch a Chromicon, etc., cleaning up your hand for your closer. The following turn, they can play Tramp, or if they're the new Eleanor build, they could go the Eleanor route, right? And then Tramp, after you play Tramp, you're basically figuring out what obnoxious way do I want to stop the person from preventing me from questing, right? So do you look for Mickey Mouse, to your Chromicon, or you're Under the Sea, and then look to kind of finish you off. Oftentimes they'll try to make sure the game is essentially in an unwinnable state for you by like turn 5, right? So on the draw, they can go a little bit more conservative to the hand, right? And basically they're just trying to exert constant pressure on you by putting out bodies that are going to get a lot of lore consistently. So they may go Bobby, they may play Mowgli and disrupt you, right? So when you're on the draw, be sure that you never are only reliant on a Sail the Azurite Sea. When they are on the play, you are on the draw. So I guess it's not very relevant here. But when they're on the draw, they may Mowgli you, just knowing that like since you're on the play, losing a card feels really bad, especially if you're going the Cinderella line, right? Because you're probably going to have to ink something you really don't want to ink now that you lost, like, let's say, like a random song or something to a Mowgli. Then they can go Nani, right? Keep the hand healthy, put a strong body on board. And then after Nani, it's really kind of just do whatever they want, right? They can flood the board with some Willows or just like a whole bunch of 1 to 2 character bodies. They could, set up like Big Tramp. You can start setting up the board state for a Lady, right? So get a lower Lady on board. There's a whole multitude of ways they can go from Nani, but Nani just makes sure that the hand is nice and healthy to kind of pick a direction. So if you're on the play as Blue Steel versus Dogs, probably, you could go 2-4-6 Cinderella into Tinkerbell. It's quite strong still, especially if you're able to follow it up with a Bolt. But I'd say that like what's consistently shown to be one of the most powerful openers really is starting off with a Mulan, particularly to set up the 1-drop 0-3 Lady for kill zone later, right? Whether it's with Tinkerbell or Angel. And then playing Sail to keep your hand a little healthy, and then playing Angel, and using Angel to immediately get rid of the Willow if they played Willow. This really forces them into like a curve of turns they really don't want to do, right? And so they may start like inking important bodies, like they might have to ink the Tramp that they've kept, and then by forcing them to get their hand smaller, any Tramp that comes to follow will be drawing, will have a little bit less options to keep as their follow-up, right? And so force them to ink, force them to burn their bodies, And then, you know, you follow up Angel with a good 5-drop, preferably one that can gain some sort of advantage, right? So ideally Moana or Pete, so that you can keep refilling her ammunition, and then following up with Goliath. It feels a little intimidating and scary to play Goliath against into dogs, but Angel effectively allows you to, you know, trade the board every turn, right? And so Goliath gives her endless ammo. And so, yeah, very strong opening. On the draw, right? And so, you know, you can always go the reliable 2-4-6 into Tinkerbell, right? And then really the best play here is double Tinkerbell. So you play Tinkerbell turn 4, and then you play another Tinkerbell turn 5, because they've probably not quested anything after you played the first one, unless they're way ahead. And then usually double Tinkerbell clears a fair section of the board, right? So it kills all Willows, kills the 1-drop Emerald Lady, kills all the Bobbies, and so kills all the Mowglis, etc., etc. And that's just a really, really good and efficient way to deal with a large board. And you can also use this play line on the play as well. I've just found the Angel line to be far more frustrating for most people. So key tips against dogs, right? I would just ink songs early. Don't even bother. If you're really kind of feeling it, right, you can maybe keep your bolt. But many dogs players will kind of know that once you establish Cinderella, right, that's when they play their Ursula, their Mowgli. They'll get rid of your song then. And so oftentimes it's better to just preserve that card in hand, and then make sure it's like a body. And once you kind of like have forced them into like a decision pathway where they're kind of committed to a plan, you probably have more of an opening to play a song, because they're less likely to like just sprinkle in that Ursula or Mowgli, etc. Your kill priority targets, Willow always dies first in the early game, right? And then any ladies after that, right? So you want to get rid of their ability to efficiently flood the board and force them to burn their hand. And, you know, you really want to eliminate the ability for Lady to shift. She could shift to Sing Under the Sea. She could shift and just refill the hand earlier in Quest for 2, right? And so Lady 5-drop is one of the scariest things in this matchup. But you want to make sure that, you know, they at least have to work to get her down, like at least have to pay the full 5. To the best of your ability, please do not ink Tinkerbells in this matchup. She is liquid gold and really helps solidify the matchup overall. And only play Goliath if you have, you know, really, really solid board control or an Angel on board, just because, you know, having him refilled a dog's hand is a pretty scary thing. So let's talk Blurple. Blurple, you know, they will very commonly want to start with one of their 1-drops that give support, right? So that can be Basil or Fauna. They'll ramp, of course, as a Sapphire deck will. And then they now are favoring Merryweather, which is a warded character, just to keep this like really strong, relevant body on the board that effectively cannot be removed that first time she comes down. Elsa is their preferred follow-up to Merryweather, utilizing Merryweather's really strong baseline stats and Elsa's ability to exert whatever's on your board. These two can get rid of almost anything. And so when you're playing against Blurple, I kind of just anticipate that from now on. Like if they have played Merryweather, they almost assuredly have an Elsa in hand. And so there's now many times where if I've played Cinderella or something, I'll have just used her ability to ink like a Thunderbolt, because it's very unlikely you'll have that Singer to sing Thunderbolt for quite a few turns. And then they'd love to finish off with a Demona here with a near empty hand. Refill their hand with 3 cards, exert your whole board, and then have Merryweather and Elsa, especially if Fauna's supporting, you know, continue to get rid of any relevant bodies that you had. On the draw, it's essentially the same. They may end with a Hades instead, just because their hand is too healthy for a Demona. But, you know, this, you know, their kind of like support character ramp, Merryweather Elsa, has kind of become the, you know, bona fide Blurple opener that they're almost always going to want. If you're on the play, Blue Steel versus Blurple, I'd recommend, you know, of course, going the Cinderella line. It's pretty rare that the Angel line ever feels all that great. You know, it can, but it's more on the rare side. And, you know, you want your first body established to be what I call bait, right? You know, you never, to the best of your ability, right, do not play Goliath immediately after Cinderella. It's very, very likely that any good Blurple player is holding a Let It Go. And when you first play Goliath like that, you know, you're not drawing anything because you'll probably have 2 cards in hand already at that point. And so he hasn't really gained you any value, even though you're trying to set him up. The days of punishing Blurple players by having him discard them is gone because they can just hardcast Let It Go. The preferred playline I've found is Tinkerbell to get rid of the 1 willpower support characters, or Pete, because you can boost him immediately. And then if he gets inked with a Let It Go or a Hades in a couple turns, then he's kind of just giving you some sort of advantage, which is honestly pretty nice. But just imagine that your first relevant 5 or 6 drop is a bait character. You're using them to absorb Let It Goes, to absorb Hadeses, and just have just enough gentle pressure to have the Blurple player even care about them. On the draw, I'd say Tinkerbell into Hades is one of your best lines. Tinkerbell gets rid of the 1 willpower support characters. It's very likely that they used Elsa and Merryweather to banish or Cinderella, and so Tinkerbell softens them up even more. And then, they may play Hades on you, and then, you just play Hades to respond and just make sure the board's nice and clean. Key tips against Blurple. A really big thing about Blurple is just understanding and accepting that there are certain curves where you will just lose your characters and there's nothing you can do about it. Some people get really defeated and tilt from this. Blurple, honestly, by getting rid of genies, they kind of take a long time to close the game. So that's really when the game's really just beginning. Understand when their power cards may come down. Sort of you start to feel it as a vibe thing once you do enough Blurple games. But, be careful about what you put out when they're going to Hades next turn. Be careful what you put out when they're going to Demona next turn. How do you need to ink your hand? Do you need to hold your hand? Things like that. Use bait for the early removal, right? Because the early removal usually is in waves of 3, right? The early removal, they've probably been able to save an Elsa. They've probably been able to save or set up a Hades, and they probably have at least 1 Demona, right? And so if you kind of know that and feel it coming, then that allows you to really prepare for it, right? And so, and you want to really conserve your Goliaths to the best of your ability, right? The early Pete's function is really good bait material, and he allows you to then ink faster because you can boost him and then get 2 ink when he gets Hades'd. But you really don't want to lose Goliaths early because the game against Blurple really does turn into a war of attrition later. As the game goes on, if we're able to continue our draw, right, whether with Pete Beyond the Horizon or Goliath, we kind of win the later game, right? Because so much of their removal is inking, right? Our resources start to end up higher than theirs, right? We may have 14, 15 ink and they're still stuck on 8, which means that as the game goes on, we're able to deploy more and larger body threats than they are, right? We could play a Vincenzo and a Hades. We can play an Ariel and a Goliath or something like that. And, these large, big threats get harder and harder to deal with as the game goes on. And then eventually our removal efficiency and removal power and how big our bodies are just starts to, outpace the Blurple player. And, so many of their tools they've probably used early. Be wary of questing or turning sideways if you suspect they might have a Cheshire Cat in hand, right? And so he can really swing things very unfavorably. So, blue-green, the dreaded blue-green matchup. This one's pretty easy. They want to open up with Clarabelle Shift Line. This is almost always a thing. Now, if they play Clarabelle early, it's pretty unusual that they have a second Clarabelle, like a 1-drop shift target, in their hand, right? It's a little cocky of them, but if you are able to get rid of the shift target, then I'd recommend it. These decks will almost always want to have their opening line be Clarabelle and Shift Your Welcome, right? And so, Cinderella has given them more consistency here, meaning that if you get rid of an early Clarabelle and they do have an extra one in hand, Cinderella actually still allows them to do their ideal opener without any problem because she sets up her final turn to be 5 ink going to 6 ink, and it takes 6 ink to play a 1-drop and then have Clarabelle shift on the 1-drop. And so what they could also do is just save the 1-drop Clarabelle, do the Cinderella, which sets you up to where you can just play the little cow, play the big cow, and then use Cinderella to sing that you're welcome and effectively do the same opener anyway as playing the one drop earlier. So on the draw, this is, I'd say in general, they actually still want to go for the Clarabelle line anyway, right? It's just so oppressive and powerful. But they do have access to another line that can be equally scary that you have to be aware of. They're going to maybe play Develop Your Brain to find all the combo pieces, ramp on turn 2, and then many times they will play Sail the Azure Sea and ramp to, again, and then play Prince Philip. And now, they're at 6 ink and Prince Philip is in the kill zone at 6 ink, because that's when you can sing Mean, Malicious, Scary, and then you can shift on 6 for the Prince Philip and then clear the board, right? And so that's a really nice way to sort of punish you for going first. And then, the kind of solid follow-up to that is a Milo Thatch to get rid of and send back to the hand any sort of follow-up you would have attempted to try to make while hopefully drawing cards for them, right? If you're on the play as blue-green, it doesn't really matter what 6-drop you play after Cinderella, you need to have Bolt. You need to have Bolt, and you need to get rid of Clarabelle, and or Cinderella, and or Donald Duck, depending on what they played, right? And I find Arthur's very, very valuable here, right? And so in general, I really try to avoid inking Arthur's in the blue-green matchup if I can. He's your ability to get rid of Warded Phillips. He's your ability to get rid of Warded Milo Thatch. And to many times, have a Tinkerbell be catapulted into a Clarabelle, come out alive, and then, kill off maybe another smaller Clarabelle. It's happened many, many times. Hades is a very good, solid strategy against blue-green, and has made many things easier. But they did say, admittedly, they and so with Hades, you just have to be a little bit wary about giving blue-green ink, right? So because the closer you get them to their Prince Philip combo setup where they can use it without a singer, right? It gets a little testier. But, Hades is a very crucial tool in blue-green. Especially for the on-the-draw response, right? Because it's almost impossible, unless they sort of mess up, to stop the Clarabelle combo with You're Welcome if they have all the pieces and they know how to hide them and when to deploy them. In which case you sort of just plan for it, right? They're going to draw a ton of cards. It is what it is. But hopefully you have a way to immediately respond to the Clarabelle. Now you could play Merida here instead of Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell would be to just exude a little bit of extra pressure. And then, you could use Sing a Bolt with Cinderella, have Tipo kill off the Clarabelle after you play the Tinkerbell, or you can just, splash a bunch of damage on their Tipo or their Cinderella or something, and then start trading off. But basically you want to keep whittling away whatever singers they have. And then after that, you can just play Hades, get rid of the Clarabelle, and then force them sort of back to ground zero. Some key tips, you want to plan for Ink Geyser. Most decks play 2 or so Ink Geysers, which will send all your ink back to your hand except for 3. And so you kind of want cards that you can immediately utilize from the ink and follow up on, right? So you want ramping cards to get you back to a good ink count. So, obviously in most case scenarios, you're inking your T-pos and sales anyway. It's totally okay to ink one of your Beyond the Horizons and a multitude of your songs, especially Let It Go, because if you get those back and you have singers on board, you can immediately hard punish your opponent, which feels really, really good. If able, kill every singer, right? Do not let them sing. Force them to use their ink. It slows them down so much. Don't give them the chance, if you can avoid it, to sing Mean, Malicious, Scary, or You're Welcome. Do your best to hold kind of warded or Philip answers, right? Because Prince Philip is honestly the only way that deck is able to beat us. The blue-green does a lot of really cool and interesting and powerful things, but at the end of the day, they are kind of just a Mean, Malicious Philip deck that hopes to use that to clean slate the board and then to kind of just close the game. But everything else is, sort of follows that linearity of that strategy. And, you can really see it because many games, blue-green will just do a whole bunch of things. They'll draw a bunch of cards. They'll filter a bunch of cards, and really like all they're looking for is this one thing. And then when they do it once, they're looking for it again in case they have to pull the trigger again. So the deck doesn't really know how to do much else outside of that. You want to be careful of 9 ink and 12 ink, right? So these are kill zones. 9 ink is when they don't need to shift Prince Philip. They can just hard cast Prince Philip, and they can use Mean Malicious to be sung by Cinderella or something like that. The other one, 12 ink, is that they can hard cast Mean Malicious and hard cast Prince Philip, meaning there's no way to stop the combo. It's coming, and you weren't really given good warning unless you were sort of planning for it. Some other lines, right? So Red Yellow Toys is pretty popular, especially in our area. Their ideal opener is going to be Woody into Bullseye, and then they will shift Woody, quest, gain 2, play a 2-drop. Oftentimes, a lot of Mowglis are teched in our area, and so play Mowgli, take away that song you were going to use to get rid of Woody, and then use the Bullseye to sing You've Got a Friend in Me, get 2 more toys, and then just keep going after that. Yellow Purple, as I said, the Dale version, they'll often start with Louisa, who feels a little bit more malleable and adaptable than Will-O-the-Wisp. Then they'll play Grandmother Willow and maybe another 1-drop if they have one. That'll allow them to play Dale on turn 3, and then afterwards play Elsa, who's a 5/5 rushing demon as long as Dale's on the board, to clear any threat, allowing everyone else to continue to quest safely. Purple Steel is kind of the same. It always is what it is, right? So you play a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, often Cheshire Cat, and then play a 4-drop, and then just when you play the 4-drop, you just have the 3-drop sing and get, do whatever they want to do, right? So after the 4-drop, and they sing Strength of Raging Fire to get rid of like a key target of yours, usually a singer such as Cinderella. They'll often follow up with just like a draw cards like Doc or Yzma or something. If it's Yzma, save removal for Yzma. Outside of that, just survive the onslaught of Docs. But really, they kind of have to have this opening with strength, because if they ever don't, they sort of just automatically lose the game. And this only keeps them in the game. It doesn't even always know them. It doesn't even always know them to a win. And so let's talk about the lists and showcase the list. This was my winning list for Set Champs. It is a little different than where it's been most of the set. It actually had 3 Vincenzo Santorinis as 7-drops. It was using 1 copy of What Else Can I Do, which is a 5-drop uninkable song introduced in Wilds Unknown, which allows you to look at the deck's 2 cards of your deck. You put 1 in the inkwell, you keep 1 in the hand. If it was sung by a character, all your other characters gain ward until the start of your next turn. Honestly, really, really cool and awesome card, but I intentionally wanted to up my Arthur count from 1, which I run pretty standard, to 2, and by doing that, I incorporated 2 Mrs. Incredibles over Vincenzo Santorini. Specifically, I wanted this ratio of these 2 characters because I knew there was going to be a higher concentration of blue-green at my Set Champs, and I really wanted ways to answer a board of warded characters and answer them efficiently, and Arthur being able to bless Mrs. Incredible and allowing her to clear a board with 7 strength and keep re-reading to do that is pretty cool. It utilizes the common aerial song removal package and aerial Sonic Warriors deadly efficiency. It just has probably the most removal any Sapphire Steel deck will ever have. It knows how to use it well, it knows how to use it efficiently, and curves super smooth. The new Merida really unlocks particularly new curves where you can answer a Clarabelle on the draw with just a single bolt if you play Merida after Cinderella, assuming Cinderella is still there. She allows you to recur the 3 arrows, which is actually really, really cool to be able to get that solid 4 damage, 3 damage removal at any point in the game when you deploy her, as long as it's in your discard. And so, and of course, there's a couple smatterings of 1-ofs and 2-ofs here because the deck has so much versatility to kind of adapt to any situation. It's a deck that is very powerful. It's a deck that is very difficult. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of understanding of other cards, other meta strategies, and because you really need to plan like 3 or 4 turns ahead for what you're going to ink, what you're going to keep, etc., etc., etc. Cybertron utilizes the new Omnidroid shift line and sort of blends inspiration from the Sonic Boom list. It has 3 aerials and has a robust song package, but it does try to capitalize on the fact that Omnidroid is a very powerful shift line, and to be able to abuse that shift line for very powerful high rolls, right? So you could play Omnidroid on 1, play Tipo on 2, and then shift Omnidroid and immediately seeing beyond the horizon on turn 3, dumping their hand, keeping around. So that's something that is very cool, very powerful. Other things is that you can have the Omnidroid on turn 3 sing and shift, or shift and sing down to New Orleans, which allows you to maybe play a free Goliath, play a Merida, play a Tinkerbell. And so now going into turn 4, they have to deal with massive bodies, or even something that just disrupted them. Ranger Plane is a super cool new card, right? And so this is an item 3 cost that gives all your other characters support. And if a character has 10 strength or more, you can exert this to give them 3 lore instantly, to give them 3 lore on their next quest, right? And so this is something that's really easy to trigger with this deck, right? Lots of 5 or 6 plus willpower characters. And then, it gives your board a little bit more threat. Like you can now quest and support a Tipo, and Tipo can take out something relevant. So that's kind of cool. It makes it a pretty strong alternate win condition as well with its 3 lore burst. Big Hero 7, it's essentially the Cybertron list without the aerial package, right? The song package is more simplified. There's no Strength of Raging Fire. There's no aerial to capitalize on the song count. And so this is a much more challenge-focused build. It's a lot more kind of an advantage-focused build, right? And so you want to establish your Mrs. Incredibles, maybe board wipe of Arthur. You have access to Pluto. You have access to 3 docks. And so, it actually puts a lot of pressure on. It's a lot more preoccupied with questing and closing the game than the other lists. And then Omnidroid kind of gives you the safety to do that while they're sort of scared on figuring out what to deal with him, right? So, Super Detectives. So Detectives, I would say, are not as strong as they were in sets 10 or 11, but they still have, a lot of great strengths, right? They're very consistent. They put out an endless flood of threats, right? They have access to so many different shift lines, opening up so many different play opportunities. And now with Mrs. Incredible, you actually have the ability to re-ready Darkwing Duck of any kind in multiple situations, right? Not just when he's like at the new location. And so this, with Mrs. Incredible, the list doesn't change too much, but it does give it a more powerful top end and a more consistent top end. And so, otherwise, you're playing your detectives, you're getting card advantage, etc., and you're hoping things continue to go well. I did not include the 3-drop Mickey Mouse detective in this list. I just felt like he wasn't enough power to justify his spot. However, if people want him or use him and they find him quite good, that's more power to you. I may revisit him in the future as well, but right now it just felt a little bit better without Mickey Mouse. Jasmine Allies. So Allies will always be a strong, consistent build, right? This is sort of bread and butter Sapphire Steel. Allies, has the power of card advantage, right? And so it has many ways to generate money and revenue. It can, it can play Docs to draw cards. It can shift Jasmine to draw cards. It can play Pete to draw cards. It can play Goliath to draw cards. So there's just so many ways that this deck just ekes out value, right, in regards to cards in hand. It has access to the typical Sapphire Steel things, such as its strong songs. The song and removal package obviously is much smaller, and it's a lot more character based. And so, Vincenzo 1 wasn't in the Sonic Boom list, partially because there were other options with other friends that I felt were more relevant, right now, right? Like Mrs. Incredible and Arthur, etc. Especially in awarded meta, right? So Vincenzo loses a lot of flavor in awarded meta. It's hard to play him and do 3 damage to Merryweather or Scuttle because they got ward, right? And so those were other decisions on cutting him from Sonic Boom. But here, he's still very relevant because he's searchable by Jasmine. He's an ally. You're keeping your other strong bomb package, 3 Hades, 1 Arthur. It's a solid split. And then, you don't have as many songs, but you have enough to get you through your early to mid game to then hopefully close the game, right, at a sooner point. So, final thoughts, right? I'd say, getting top 8 takes skill, right? But winning takes a little bit of luck, right? You need a little bit of destiny for a win to line up. At my set champs, a third of the room was dogs. 7 out of 20 players were dogs, and I didn't run into a single one, right? Now, not that I don't feel like I couldn't have beaten many of them, but they probably had the highest chance of knocking me out of the tournament, and avoiding them was greatly in my favor, on top of the fact that playing against dogs simply isn't fun. And for perspective, right, I played against a friend of mine with dogs today, and he beat me in the first best of 3. He beat me in the second best of 3. I beat him in the third best of 3, and then I was on track to beat him in the fourth best of 3. Although we were kind of getting kicked out of the store by then. But it just goes to show that like how volatile and that matchup is, and how strong the deck is. The dogs into blue steel, especially when things go directly in their favor. And there's just so many ways to have that matchup be thrown away. But anyway, all that to say that like at my set champs, I got first, and a lot of it was, I got really good matchups, right? I kept getting great answers when my opponents didn't. I knew how to adjust my best of 3, or my strategy in a best of 3, right? And so all that became very, very relevant. But I'd say like general skill consistently gets you top 8 and will get you the promo card. And so keep practicing, keep growing your knowledge. And that's a good lead in to know your meta, right? And so playing online and practicing online can actually be dangerous to your deck building and your strategy, because oftentimes people will overcorrect for, I really have to have an answer for these dog decks with Eleanor, or like I really have to like have item removal because I keep running into this snow fort build on duel on like the online platform. But your local meta may not play any of that, right? Maybe your local meta avoids dog decks. Maybe your local meta has no items guys, right? And probably never will. And so adjusting your deck for set champs for your local meta is very important. And so be sure to know your game store playmates. Be sure to kind of gain an understanding of what they want to do, and that goes into the next point of play the player, right? And so it's just as important to kind of see their mannerisms, see their ink decisions, see their way of approaching the game. Are they more risky? Are they more conservative? Do they go all in, or do they hold back? What cards are their favorite cards? What are they not willing to give up? What are they willing to give up? And so pay attention to what the player is doing and play the player just as much as you're playing the deck, and you'll find yourself amazed at how much that can come into play. If you finish early, scan the room, right? Stand up, walk around, look at other people play, enjoy some Lorcana, but also take some knowledge in, right? Look at people's tech cards, look at how their decision making, etc. It'll give you a lot more confidence going into your next game if you finish your game early. And I can't emphasize this enough, right? Set champs is meant to be a celebration of competition in an environment where most people are usually expected to know each other. Be kind and have fun, right? And so I walked in to my set champs with the attitude of like, I might brick all day, I might miss ramp all day, but I love these people that I play with. I know them all by name, I know them all by face, and I just want to have a good time. Play the deck I love against the people I love. And you know what? I came out with the mat, I came out with the promo, and I'm very thankful for that. But I think a lot of it was a mindset change, or a mindset as well, right? Like, if you don't have that pressure on yourself, if you're kind, people will be kind to you. If you give take backs, they'll give you take backs, right? And so just keep the game fun, right? Have a good time. There's many games where I was just joking around with my opponent. We're just, shooting the shot. And, set champs, we want to keep set champs just an enjoyable experience, right? And so be a part of that. Well, that's all we got for Sapphire Steel. Let me know how you guys do. Let me know if you guys take any of these lists. Let me know if this new sort of format was helpful. And, as always, you guys know how it is. May you be blessed. Take it easy.